Thank you so much for choosing this podcast, Constructive Uncoupling, the place where I hope to be able to teach you how to have the most amicable divorce possible, given whatever the circumstances are. I'm Judy Weigel, your host, and your amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's all I do. My company is Divorce Resource Incorporated in Los Angeles. Today I'd like to talk to you about fear. It's the overriding emotion in every single divorce, regardless of how amicable it is. Fear dictates all of our thinking, all of our behavior, all of our communication, and all of our choices. And as soon as you can get rid of fear, you can have a much better divorce. And the last line I use in all of my confirmation emails when I bring people in to either file or to mediate, the very last line is, divorce is a new beginning. If you can think of something as life-changing and fearful as divorce and make it a benefit to you, you have then proceeded on your life journey of learning. And that's all divorce is. It's a learning experience. And that's the first way I want to show you how to get fear out of the equation. It's an experience. Nobody's a criminal because they're getting divorced. Of course, unless you are a criminal, well, then that's an issue for criminal court and not for this podcast. But if you are the garden variety human being that makes mistakes, that wants to do the right thing, but the right thing just doesn't seem to work out in the case of your marriage, then let's have the most amicable divorce possible without fear. So I want to show you how to get fear out of the equation. I want to teach you how not to think with that part of your brain that's the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain is the part of your brain that doesn't use logic. It just acts on emotion and emotion driven by fear. Whenever you see that coming up, don't make any decisions. Be quiet. Stop. Think. That's what you have to do. If you can deal with fear in a metered way, and that is merely say something like, I'm really fearful right now, and I don't think I'm going to make the best decision possible. Please give me some time. I want to make a decision. I want to engage. I'm just working with fear right now. Do you know what that would do if you said that to your spouse? Hey, do you know what that would do if you said it? Honesty is the best policy generally. Well, yes, it is the best policy. It's the way we phrase our words and what we want to say that's honest that makes a difference. But just admitting that you're fearful and that you don't want to make decisions that you will possibly want to change because you're making them out of fear, that shows that you're not using reptilian anymore and that you're going back to the center of your logic. Now, where did we see reptilian brought up recently? Vanderpump Rules, Bravo, reality show. And it was so cool that the mother of one of the cast members was giving a free seminar to all of the other cast members that work at SUR, Lisa Vanderpump's restaurant, part of Vanderpump Rules. I thought that was really good information. Just don't make a decision when you're in fear mode. Slow it down a little bit, and it will bode well for you in the future. Let's talk about the two parties, both husband-wife or wife-wife, husband-husband. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who asked for the divorce. It doesn't matter who was asked for the divorce. Everybody's in fear mode. And when you're in fear mode, your behavior changes. The person who makes more money, who's going to end up paying either child support and or spousal support, they're in fear mode, big time they're in fear mode. They're the ones that are going to be living on a lot less. It will be their responsibility to pay money each month. And so they're going to go into protective mode unless there's a whole lot of money to go around. They're going to be in protective mode immediately. More than likely, if there's somebody who works on overtime, like policemen and firemen, I get questions from them all the time. Judy, should I continue to make overtime or should I cut back? Won't more overtime mean I have to pay more child and spousal support? And my answer? You make as much money as you can possibly make. Do not play the support game. Worrying about whether you make more money, therefore owe more support, is a losing person's proposition. Make as much money as you can. Whatever the amount of child and spousal support is, if for some reason your other expenses prohibit to a large extent paying the number that comes out of the calculator called the Disomaster in California, then talk about it to your spouse. Bring it up in a mediation. Make it a negotiation. Just say, look, this is what came out on the Disomaster. These are my expenses. Can we have a conversation about how I am to meet these obligations, which I really want to meet? Yes, you have to say you really want to meet them. Get yourself in that headspace that you really want to meet them, because things will go well for you in the negotiation with the recipient spouse. But make as much money as you can. You still need more money to live on. Now let's go to the other spouse, the recipient of child and spousal support. They're in fear mode. They're apparently making less money. Therefore, they're dependent on the other spouse for money every month. And the fear is, well, what if it doesn't come? So as the recipient, you have to approach this as, let me make as much money as I can whenever I can. Do not play the game of, well, I didn't make money, I wasn't supposed to, I just want what I'm entitled to, I just want what's fair. Those phrases never work. Here's what I would do, and here's what I say. First of all, if you haven't made much money because your role has been to be the caretaker of the family, that's fine. Then you're going to need more time. But bring it up that you realize that with the child and the spousal support that you may be receiving, coupled with whatever you're making now or soon to make, you're going to try and do the best you can, because if you have children, they need the best from both of you, not just from one person. They need the financial best from both of you. And if you can both give your financial best, the kids are going to do well. You're going to be able to provide for them. But I'm going to quote Ramona Singer from the New York City Housewives from the very first season that show aired on Bravo. I talk about her all the time, and even if you haven't seen the show, if you tune in, every single year she says the same thing to women: make your own money. It used to be years ago that you could afford to be the traditional spouse that stayed home, but not anymore. It costs too much to live now. So Ramona Singer, make your own money, be independent, and then if something happens, either your spouse dies or you enter into a divorce, you're not as needy and dependent. If you are in that transition point, at that transition point where you really didn't earn much money, it was the decision not to earn money, and that's perfectly fine, you're going to need time to get up to speed. What if the industry and the area that you got your education in doesn't exist anymore? That's happening a lot. The world's changing quickly. You're going to need time to educate yourself and get back into the job force. And it's the way you talk to your spouse, acknowledging that it's going to be hard and you know it. Just acknowledging that instead of saying, listen, I'm entitled to this and I just want what I'm entitled to. If you push it to a court of law, maybe. but you don't really know. You don't know all the factors the judge will consider when looking at spousal support. The judge may only give it to you for a couple of years, thinking or stating that you should be in the job force making more money within a couple of years. You don't know. So just saying to your spouse, I understand this is going to be really hard on you. Let's just look at what the normal process states. Let's run the DISO master. Let's give all of our financials that are relevant right now. And then let's have a conversation and a negotiation, either in mediation or between ourselves, and let's work out what works best for both of us. See, now what you've done is you've taken your own fear, put it aside. You've considered the other person and the fear they're going through. You've acknowledged it. You've acknowledged the responsibility of your spouse going forward. And I cannot tell you how well that will bode for you going forward. And it's really hard to do. It's so hard to do because you're working through all the emotions that brought you to the point of divorce. You still have to deal with all of that while you're making all of these financial decisions. But you know, when we admit and speak out loud that we're in fear, but we're acknowledging that the other person is in fear, you're both experiencing the same emotion, slightly different ways, but the same emotion. Now you've kind of equalized the fear, and you've acknowledged it. And try and be sensitive to each other. Just say, look, I'm in fear. I know I am obligated to child and spousal support. I'm really fearful that I'll be able to meet my own expenses and live, but I really want to do what's right. So let's work through this process as we're supposed to. Let's look at what the numbers are. I know that you are not making a lot of money, other spouse, or no money if that's the situation. And I know that you're going to be working hard to do the best you can. Okay, even if you think they're not, say it anyway. Because that then gives them maybe a little bit of impetus to do better, I hope. We'll see. But say, and just acknowledge it may give you may need time to be up and running, but whatever you can do to bring in some money would be so helpful all the way around because we have so many expenses coming up. You see, that's the way you take care of each other. You acknowledge fear, you acknowledge your fear, you acknowledge the other person's fear, and you acknowledge that there's just a ton of fear in all of the responsibilities that you both have to meet. Now you're on your way to a much better divorce. Let's talk about the 5 fear factors of divorce. And there are 5 of them. And either all 5 come up in every single divorce that I do, so it has to come up in everybody's divorce, or only some of them do. But let's look at what the 5 fear factors are. Number 1 is custody and support with children. So if you have children of the marriage, you're going to be fearful of if you are both nurturing parents and you both really want to be part of your child's life. Generally, the man is more fearful than the woman in custody. The man is still working under the old paradigm that women get more rights, so to speak, in custody and men don't. But that has changed, and it is continuing to change with the viewpoint that children need both of their parents an equal amount of time. So that should make, hopefully, the men feel a little bit better going into this. But let me just state something that's obvious that judges really can't talk about because it has nothing to do with the law. Therapists will talk about this. And I suggest that both spouses get a therapist. Either a co-parenting therapist that works with both of you, so you don't spend as much money, but you both get a great service provided to show you from a therapist's point of view what the results will be on your children in the event that it's an uneven distribution of time, and can also look at what your children need from you at different stages in their lives. So we have boys and girls, right? So at each stage in our children's lives, they might need one parent more than the other, and that will flip-flop. So whatever co-parenting plan you choose at the beginning of the divorce and want to put in the settlement agreement, that's going to change as your children get older, and you're going to see it. Your children are either going to tell you they need more time with one parent over another, or you're going to notice that your children might be afraid to say something, but that they might need one parent over another. Look, both parents are different people. They have different skills and talents and nurturing abilities to bring to the table. And maybe if a boy is going into sports and the father is more sports acclimated, maybe the father was a coach, so maybe you do need to be with dad a little bit more, but it certainly doesn't mean that mom isn't bringing valuable nurturing and skills and talents to the table. You just may need a different proportion of time. And girls go through all of their physical issues, when they reach maturity at 13 or so years, they will need their mom for that. But their dad can be a great influencing factor when they're ready to date. And I don't mean to demean a lesbian couple or a gay male couple if there are two female parents versus two male parents. Both can be very nurturing, and still, even though you may be both women or you may be both men, you still bring different skills and talents to the table. So just be aware that your children are going to change the equation on the co-parenting schedule as time goes on. And if you could all just please be open to that and adjust accordingly, everybody will do the best for themselves or for their children and themselves. And don't worry that it changes the amount of child support. It doesn't matter. What matters are the children, and you will both just do your best to accommodate the kids financially. So child support pays for food, shelter, and clothing. That's all it pays for. Everything else for our child, which are listed under miscellaneous expenses in the settlement agreement, like school activities, social activities, sports activities, artistic activities, summer camp, cell phones, computers, and then cars, and the biggest ticket item of all, college. All of these are supposed to be divided equally to the best of both parents' abilities. And when I say to the best, I mean the lower wage earner. If we do have a significantly lower wage earner, if that person can't pay half of something that the higher wage earner found, then the lower wage earner should look for something commensurate that they can pay half of or negotiate to pay less than half. But child support does not cover every single expense. It doesn't make sense that it can. Our child's expenses the miscellaneous expenses are far more than food, shelter, and clothing. And the reason why child support is paid to one parent over the other, it's generally paid to the parent who makes less money and who has more time with the children, meaning they buy more food, they have to have a place that accommodates the children with bedrooms and space, and they go clothing shopping more. So that's why child support is paid to the parent that makes less money and spends more time with the children. So that's child support. Now let's look at custody, the other fear factor with the children. Custody does not have a percentage attached to it, and everybody thinks it does. I want 50% custody. That's all I want is 50% custody. There's no such thing as 50% custody. Why? Because custody is a category of decision making. Custody is a category of decision making. You either have joint custody, where both parents are equally invested in making decisions for their children. Legal custody has to do with the health and welfare of our children, which means their education, their medical treatment, how they're brought up culturally, and how they're brought up religiously. That's legal custody. And then there's physical custody. Physical custody has to do with where the children live. So you both make decisions about where the children move to. Even if they move within the county where you filed for the divorce, you still have to live a reasonable amount of miles close to each other so that both people can co-parent. Both parents can take the kids to school, pick them up from school if that's part of the co-parenting schedule. But there are a suggested number of miles that the state and the county say they would like you to live in proximity to. 20 miles is for Los Angeles County. And 20 miles is because it takes 8,000 years just to go 10 miles. I mean, it's ridiculous. Freeway or side street, doesn't matter. And so, when it's time to pick your children up, take them to school, pick them up from school, go to activities, it really is better if you can live close together, because then both parents can mutually participate. But I don't want anybody to be afraid of custody, because it's no longer assumed that mom gets sole custody. It just isn't. Unless there's something seriously wrong with mom or dad, then the courts are now looking at joint custody for legal and physical as much as possible. So I want to get rid of that fear now with custody and support. You can negotiate support, always negotiable and modifiable, and the courts no longer look at mom being the better parent. Second, spousal support. Huge fear with spousal support. And so the question is, well, geez, this is the woman speaking. I don't understand why he or she or he, the other spouse, doesn't want to pay spousal support. I mean, I raised the children. I gave up my career. I allowed my spouse to grow in their career. Why don't they want to pay me spousal support? Well, I asked a lot of therapists this question. I said, if it's a traditional male-female marriage, why do a lot of men just want to walk and want the wife to make her own money? And I was told by every therapist, because it is kind of a trait of the male species that they just want it to be over. They need to cut the hurt, deal with it, move on, and spousal support ties one spouse to the other until it's over. So, what do you do in the issue of spousal support? Well, first of all, let's just understand why spousal support exists. And let's get rid of that entitled and fair thinking. If you're in front of a judge, entitled and fair will be the judge's purview. But until you're in front of the judge, and most people do not go in front of the judge, most people settle everything out of court, either in mediation or between their respective attorneys. They don't go to court. So this is going to be a negotiable issue. But let me explain where spousal support came from. Spousal support was invented in the late 1800s when it was totally traditional marriage. Woman stayed home, had kids, raised kids, husband went to work. Women didn't even go to college in the late 1800s. So there were no skills and talents, of course, unless they wanted to work in the saloon, where I'm hoping that women made a lot of money and had a lot of fun. But generally, women did not work in the saloon. Women raised children. So this is for the woman. It started when the man of 20, 25 years marriage, the kids were already grown, and the man didn't want to be married anymore. This was to help the woman who had absolutely no options but to rely on her husband for the rest of her life. So spousal support was created to even out the income levels of the spouses going forward, so that one spouse wasn't doing well and the other spouse penniless. That's the point of spousal support, to even the income levels going forward. Let me dispel a myth. And the myth is spousal support is supposed to allow you, the recipient, to live in the manner that you were accustomed to, even to the detriment of the other spouse. Ain't gonna happen. Doesn't work like that. Not in California, it doesn't. And of course, I can only speak for California divorces when I get to specifics like that. But that's not the point of spousal support. The recipient is not supposed to live in the manner that they were accustomed to, and the other spouse not. And why? Because then it would not be... It's not a right and an entitlement of one spouse to go broke so that the other spouse can live the way they used to live. And it doesn't even make sense that that can happen. Well, first of all, if that could happen, then how does the payor pay their bills? How do they have a car, a house to live in? You still have to function on less, yes, but you still have to function if you're the payor. So don't expect that. And if anybody tells you that, run screaming from that human being, because it'll never work out like that once you get in front of the judge. The judge will use the disso master in California court, and the disso master is there to even out the monies that each spouse is living on. And that's the way it's going to be. So with spousal support, as the recipient, know that at the very end of the day, you can go to court and the judge will even out the monies going forward. You know that can happen. Do not use the judge or court as a threat. Just know it's there to help you and negotiate. You can negotiate for a lump sum. Payors love lump sums because it's done and over with. And if the money's there to use as a lump sum, great. If it's not, we have to find it somewhere. You negotiate the number of years. In California, a marriage under 10 years, spousal support is available half the length of the marriage. Over 10 years, it's horrifying. Those are the horrifying mediations for spousal support. But that's what makes mediators better. Well, that's where you have to get a good mediator, because if it's one day over 10 years in California, it's not going to be forever. It's just not going to be forever. Because more than likely the judge will expect you to be up and running faster and make your own money. So if it's 15, 17 years and longer, you have more of a chance of lifetime. But spousal support is modifiable too based on the changing incomes of both people. So if you're the payor, I would look for a lump sum and see if that works. See, lump sums are beautiful because A, the payor doesn't have to deal with monthly payments every month. The recipient doesn't have to worry about, are the monthly payments going to get to me on time every month? And if you get a lump sum recipient, you can do a lot more with that lump sum. You can invest it and invest part of it and live on part of it. If you're extremely debt-ridden and have a lot of credit card debt, you can save on all those interest payments and pay those credit cards off faster. I mean, you can do a lot with a lump sum. That's something that is really advantageous if it can happen. But for the payor, you're going to pay spousal support. You can only run and hide so long, so don't even try. And if it means if you can work overtime and make more money, make more money. Do the best you can for yourself. Don't play the support game so that you can spend less money. And recipients, don't hang on to those part-time teacher jobs that are going to get you nowhere in a divorce. Great when you're married and you can be there when the kids come home from school. My mom didn't work. We loved her being home when we got home from school. But those days are over for the most part. We have two-income families for a reason. The cost of living is ginormous. So if you are a recipient and you've been working at your child's school to save on tuition, to be there when your children get off, you may have to get another job that makes a lot more money. Because you're not going to live well if you don't. It's putting a square peg in a round hole. It's inappropriate anymore. You got to make money so that the issue of spousal support becomes less of an issue. And again, my suggestion to the recipient is do not use fair and entitled. Just say this. Let's just see what the DISO master provides. Let's look at our monthly expenses and let's negotiate something that works for both of us. If you can say that, you are taking a lot of fear out of the spousal support for yourself and your spouse. Third, the house. If I had a penny for everybody who wanted to stay in the house that couldn't afford it, I would no longer have to work. It generally is the person who can't afford the house, who wants to live in the house because they don't want to disturb the children. That's generally the reason. And let me tell you, the children do not have the investment in the house that you do. The children have far bigger fish to fry than the house they live in. They have to get used to being children in divorce. And that process is going to go on regardless of what house they live in. So start thinking smart about that real estate. If you have a ton of equity in that house, and selling it and dividing the equity would set both you and both spouses up to live well, maybe that should be the overriding consideration and not how do we keep the house so that we don't disturb the children. There is a video that you can look at called Split, S-P-L-I-T. Just go on Google and you'll find it. It's a woman, Ellen Bruno, who's the film producer, and she went through a terrible divorce. She interviewed children. It was a horrible custody issue. She interviewed children from ages 5 to 13 and asked them what they were fearful of in the divorce. And they named everything. We were fearful that we wouldn't see our friends. We were fearful that we would change schools. We were fearful that we would forget things if we were at the other parent's house. We were fearful that we wouldn't like if we lived somewhere else. And each and every one of them said at the end of the day, when everything was said and done, the only thing that mattered is that their parents got along. Done. The only thing that mattered is that their parents got along. Isn't that something? So let's talk a little bit more about the house. Okay, so what if you both are interested in keeping the house and you want to see if the lower wage earner can live in the house, pay for it? Great. If you're both on board doing that, that's absolutely fine. I would never try and tell you to think differently. So let's look at that situation and how to make that work. A few things you have to consider. If you want one person to stay in the house, presumably the lower wage earner, presumably the woman, then you have to, and both of you are on the mortgage and both of you are on the title. In order to get the person off the mortgage, the higher wage earner, the lower wage earner has to refinance in their own name in order to remove the other spouse from the mortgage. And then the other spouse can leave title. Now, can they leave title without leaving mortgage? Absolutely. Is it the smart thing to do? Absolutely not. And here's why. Once one spouse removes their name from the title and not the mortgage, they are still responsible for payment of the mortgage if something innocently happens to the other person living in the house. Innocently. You are still responsible, other person not on title anymore, for paying the mortgage. And I can't tell you the number of attorneys who have said to me, as they're reading through the settlement agreements for one or both spouses that I'm dealing with as a legal document assistant to file for their divorce, The attorneys have written lots of language saying, well, the person who's living in the house will always be responsible and hold the other person harmless, blah, blah, blah. And that sounds fine unless you go to talk to the mortgage company. And the mortgage company will say, are you out of your mind? I want anybody to pay this mortgage who can. I couldn't care less what your deal was in the divorce. And I have gone to family law seminars where judges have even said, lawyers, if you think mortgage companies are going to abide these passages that you are writing in your settlement agreements to hold the other person harmless, you're out of your mind. No mortgage company is going to do that. Why would they? They want their money. So, you have got to be, lower wage earner, you have got to be able to afford that house. You have got to be able to make the mortgage payments, the property tax payments, all the utilities, all the repairs, all the gardening, whatever it takes to keep the house going. That's up to you. So what are you going to do? Is it even feasible? If at all possible, consider selling the house and dividing the equity. It's the smartest thing for both of you. If you live in California and real estate is ridiculously expensive and you never think you're going to get back into the real estate market, then you both really have to negotiate a very creative settlement, making the house your centerpiece. Maybe not making spousal support and child support your centerpiece. Maybe making everything about the house the centerpiece. And instead of paying child and spousal support, higher wage earner, or how do we say this? Negotiate a settlement that creatively deals with the child support or miscellaneous expenses for the children versus spousal support versus how are we going to keep this house alive and well, and when are we going to be able to get me off the mortgage? So you have to have that conversation about refinancing in one person's name to get the other person off the mortgage so they can buy a house if they want to, and so that they're no longer responsible for the mortgage and the property taxes. And when you're evaluating the house to buy out the other person, if you're going to go through a refinance, the mortgage company is going to insist on an appraisal. So you're going to get the house appraised. You're going to know what the value of the house is. If you're not going to go through an appraisal, if the person who's staying in the house is the only person on the mortgage, but both of you are on the title, that makes it super easy. You can remove yourself from the title as soon as you get your equity out of the house. But do know that you don't back out broker fees and escrow fees if you're buying somebody out. You don't do that. And why? Because the one who stays in the house is going to enjoy the value of increased equity as time goes on. The house will more than likely raise in value and you will get the advantage of that. That's why you don't pay what would presumably be a real estate agent's fee and escrow fees. That's why that's not part of the equation when you're buying somebody out. Number 4, pensions. Huge fear factor, especially firemen and policemen. So these are two communities of people that I advertise to because there's a high divorce rate and I want them to have the most peaceful divorces possible. And those pensions to policemen and firemen are gold, and very few want to divide their pension. Do not be fearful, other spouse, if that happens. Just look for your portion of the pension somewhere else. And so what I've seen are deals where we look at what the community half of the pension would be to the other spouse, and the one holding the pensions will give up that much in the equity of the house. That's how I've seen those deals go. Well, that's fine. But what do you do with a marriage where only one pension has been invested in, and that's the higher wage earner's pension, and the other person's pension has not been invested in, and so now you're getting divorced. So absolutely the lower wage earner will want half of the other person's pension. Depending on how old you are, you can always make more money back in the pension. So if it has to be, it has to be. But know that there are creative ways to supplement. Instead of dividing the pension, you can give all of other things away. So you can be very creative in your settlement. But let's just say you're a few years away from retirement. What do? Well, you do what you need to do to make it the best settlement possible. Don't be afraid of dividing the pensions. Look at it as the investment has to be equaled. The intention was that we were both going to live on these pensions and live up to the honor of that. I mean, you have to honor the person that didn't participate in their pension. You just have to. It's the humane thing to do, and you're going to feel better about yourself, hopefully, doing the humane thing. But the only portion of the pensions that are divisible are those portions that were participated in from date of marriage to date of separation in the state of California. So if you invested in a pension prior to marriage, that portion is separate property. Whatever you invested in after the date of separation, that portion is separate property. So you're really only looking at what you invested in between date of marriage and date of separation. And I know. There are, in some people's pensions, there are two sections. One can easily be divided now and distributed, and the other can't until retirement. That's the other thing to know. So get clear with your pension company. If you have two portions to your pension, what can be divided now, what has to be divided at the point of retirement, and maybe out of what can be given away now, maybe giving all of that to the other spouse will equalize not breaking that portion that can only be divided at retirement whole and intact. Maybe that's a creative way of doing it. In the entertainment industry, which is a huge industry in Los Angeles, that's what we do with Directors Guild pensions and motion picture pensions. There's the divisible part now, and that can't be divided until retirement. Now, I did a mediation recently on, I call them a fairly young couple in their 30s, where there were two portions to the pension, and the husband who held the pensions easily gave away, no issue with the portion that could be divided. In fact, he wanted to give it all to her if she would give up rights on the portion that didn't distribute until retirement. It was just a teeny bit of money a month the wife was going to give up, and it was very symbolic to the husband. More than anything, it was symbolic to the husband. And the wife was just working in fear mode constantly. She really didn't save anything for herself, and she was working on pennies. And I understood that, and she was not looking at what she could do to provide for herself in a larger way and control that. She was more looking through the eyes of poverty. And through the eyes of poverty, she just wanted every single penny she could possibly get. Well, she wasn't legally wrong for doing it. She was actually right. And she consulted with two attorneys, and they both said the same thing, and the husband understood she was technically right. But he said to her, look, I provided for you. I paid for everything. And you did a very short-term marriage, by the way. And I love the daughter that we had together. And I want to be the best dad possible. And I would be willing to give you more of the distributable pension now if you would just not ask for this teeny little distribution monthly that you would be entitled to when I finally retire in 30 years or more. And he had a very physical job. He wasn't even sure he was going to make it 30 more years. And she just wasn't going to allow that to happen. Well, they did get divorced out of court, by the way. It wasn't conciliatory. They banged it out. We got it done. We filed. But it really didn't bode well for the energy they put on co-parenting. And I'm sure it started affecting their daughter, because they wisely called me and asked for a co-parenting therapist, because they started to see that the level of incompatibility they showed when dividing assets and debts was now having a negative effect on their co-parenting of their daughter. So when you have a spouse that really is attached to their pension and will give you something else, if you will just not touch their pension, consider doing it, especially if you can make the same amount of money. It's so smart to do that. Not asking you to give up anything you're entitled to. I'm asking you to look at things differently, to move the pieces of the puzzle around differently, to come out to the same end, which is a fairly equal distribution of assets and debts. And lastly, number 5, health insurance. Health insurance used to be one of the driving factors in whether people chose divorce or legal separation. In legal separation, the spouse that has been using the other spouse's health insurance can still use it. In a divorce, you can't. Once the divorce is final, at the end of that month that the divorce became final, the health insurance will go away. Not because the other spouse is being mean, the one covering you. It's that if they're working for a company, they are liable if they don't let their human resources company know they're getting divorced, so that the health insurance company can end the health insurance at the end of the month when the divorce is final. You have to do it. But now that Covered California became an option, I don't know where we're going with all of this, but, because right now things are changing politically. But once we had Covered California and pre-existing conditions could not be a detriment to getting health insurance, I saw a lot less legal separations and a lot more divorces for that reason. But in terms of health insurance, it's horrible, it's expensive, it's mean, it's not fair. We have a lot of work to do with health insurance, but that's a big issue. And a lot of times people don't file for divorce because they may have some health issues and they want to stay covered as much as possible, so they stay married. It has to work itself out. You know that even if you had something catastrophic happen and you didn't have health insurance, you could go on a payment system, go to the emergency room, get treated, and then you could go on a payment system. There are people that aren't covered still because it's so expensive. But if health insurance could become part of the negotiation, or if for spousal support, if an independent health insurance policy could possibly be part of the spousal support negotiation, that's one way of taking care of it. But also, this is actually a good reason to take care of our health. The better we take care of ourselves, the more we need to call on the medical community for help. And maybe this, in a convoluted way, would be an impetus for taking care of ourselves so that we wouldn't have to rely on health insurance as much. Look into more Eastern medicine, Eastern approaches to diet. I saw a program recently on an educational television station where Western doctors had changed their whole practices to a food-based practice so that they wouldn't have to give prescriptions for medicine as much. So, and they saw symptoms and illnesses go down and away when people changed their diets. Food is so vitally important to the health and welfare of our physical bodies and our emotions and our thinking. Food is integral. And then exercise, of course. Oh my God. Yes, food and exercise. So health insurance, we can really manage what we spend on health insurance by managing our health better. But if you are of a health condition that just isn't going to go away, it is what it is, well, then that becomes the centerpiece of how you start negotiating, because without our health, we can't do anything. But health insurance is one of the 5 fear factors of divorce. And you have to really look at how are you doing not filing for divorce because of the fear wrapped up into health insurance. Is that workable? Okay, well, maybe it is then. And then you'll do what you have to do when it's time to file. But if avoiding filing for divorce is a result of the fear of health insurance, you simply have to approach health insurance in a different way then, in a more positive way, so that you can lead a free and independent life as soon as possible. Well, I hope this helped, putting in perspective the 5 fear factors of divorce and letting you know that we all are fearful. Every single one of us is fearful going into divorce. It's the financial aspect of it. It's the custody and co-parenting aspect of it. And it's just learning how to function in a different role other than the spouse of. So thank you so much for joining me. I look forward till our next episode. You can always reach me, Judy Weigel, at Divorce Resource Incorporated in Los Angeles. My email address is Judy, Judy, at divorceresourceinc.com. That's Judy at divorceresourceinc.com. Thank you so much.